Guys, in Bible today, I'm going to be trying something new that I've never done before with a camera setup like this because you know already I have trouble sometimes with this camera that it looks big, but it can be a little bit short. When I put things underneath it, they can get right up close to that camera really fast. So I need something with a little more space. So I'm going to be trying a totally new thing here. Today, we are starting the big story that we're really studying for this unit. And when I tell you this story, I want you to think about trustworthiness. Boys and girls, back about the time Jesus was alive, there was a man named Saul. Now, Saul did not grow up in Jerusalem. He grew up quite a ways away, but he wanted very much to be a very good Jew. He learned all the correct languages and went to the right schools. In fact, he was taught by a special teacher of the law named Gamaliel. Gamaliel was one of the most respected teachers of the Jewish law that they had. So when Saul could say to people that he had been Gamaliel's student, everybody knew that meant Saul was one of the most important, wisest people learning God's laws. So he got a lot of respect. Now, Saul eventually did go to Jerusalem. Now, you know, in Jerusalem, there were, of course, Levites, the people who helped in the temples. There were the priests, the special Levites who were dedicated to serving in the temple, just like we talked about some when we talked about baby Jesus being born. And then there were also the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Now, the Pharisees and the Sadducees were not necessarily Levites or priests who helped in the temple, but much like Saul, they were people who had studied the law extra special carefully. Saul was a Pharisee. He was one of the best, most respected Pharisees around, except he was quite a bit young compared to some of the others. Most of the Pharisees were quite a bit older, and Saul was very young. But Saul was very smart, and Saul had had a wonderful teacher in Gamaliel. So even though he was very young, he was still very well respected. Now, the priests and the Pharisees did not like the followers of Jesus. They called them the followers of the way, and they got very angry with them, especially as the message about Jesus became more and more popular. Jesus wasn't here on the earth anymore, but people who had followed Jesus, like Peter and James and John, well, they were telling everyone about what Jesus had said. And the priests and the Pharisees were very angry about that. So they actually ended up taking one of Jesus' followers and having him killed. They had him killed by throwing stones at him until he died. At the very end of the story is the first time that the Bible mentions Saul. And all it says is that Saul was holding their cloaks. We talked about that before, right? This outside part that you would take off when you went to do hard work. I guess they thought it was hard work to throw rocks at someone till they died, so they had taken their cloaks off. And rather than having their cloaks get in the dirt, apparently Saul was holding them. Now, that tells us the Bible specifically says Saul was approving of what they did. He wasn't doing it, he was holding the cloaks, but the Bible actually says Saul approved of this. Now, the next thing that we hear about Saul in the Bible is that Saul went to the priests and to the other teachers, the leaders of the Jews, and he was helping them find more Christians. And he would go to those Christians and he would grab them and he would have guards come and the guards would take them away to jail. And so Saul got lots and lots of Christians trapped and put into jail. Now, it's not nice to be in jail these days, but back then, jail was even terrible, more terrible than it is right now. If you were in jail, you didn't get very much food unless someone brought it to you. We talked about this with Joseph. Do you remember a jail would just be a yucky, rocky cold sort of place or maybe hot, and they didn't work at trying to keep you comfortable at all. So Saul, the Bible says he was breathing out murderous threats against the followers of the way, dragging them out of their homes and throwing them in jail. Well, Saul wanted so much to get Jesus' followers into jail that he went to the priests and he said, I heard in another town there are lots of followers of the way. Give me a letter to take to the priests there, the leaders of the synagogue. That was their churches. I will take that letter there and I will arrest the followers of the way and I will bring them back to Jerusalem in chains to be prisoners and go into jail where they probably wouldn't ever come out. Well, the priests liked that idea because they didn't want to have any more followers of Jesus. And now there were followers of Jesus not just in Jerusalem, but they were spreading farther and farther out. So the priests, sure enough, gave him the letter. And Saul started to go on his way to another town to arrest more and more followers of Jesus and put them in jail. So, girls, you would not think that that would be a trustworthy sort of man, would you? Saul trying to actually kill people for believing in Jesus? That does not seem trustworthy at all. However, he became so trustworthy in God's eyes that he wrote a whole bunch of the books of the Bible that we study. So, trustworthiness, God can really change people to make trustworthiness happen where God plans for it to happen. So I want you to think about some of the other things we've talked about this year, especially things in science, things that have changed. They start out one way and they end up a completely different way. I bet you guys can think of a lot of examples of that. We did some with insects, but boy, just think about maybe some of the Valentine's things we did for your parents. Maybe think about some things that we've done with ice cubes. What are some things that we've looked at that start out one way and then they end up a completely different way? In your encounter journal today, I want you to draw or write about something that completely changes. It starts out one way and then it changes into something very, very different.